For what purpose does the gentlelady from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 548, I call up the bill H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 36, a bill to amend Title 18, United States Code to protect pain-capable unborn children and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 548, the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Handel, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials to H.R. 36.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I rise today to support, Mr. Speaker, of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, also known as Micah's Law. This bill prohibits most elective abortions at 20 weeks after fertilization and thereafter. That's the beginning of the 5th month of pregnancy. That's the point in a pregnancy when a substantial body of medical evidence shows that a baby in the womb can feel pain. H.R. 36 is humane legislation for innocent babies and for mothers. It includes exceptions for the life of the mother and exceptions in the case of rape and incest. Additionally, this bill imposes criminal liability only on the medical professional performing that abortion, not on the mother. Mr. Speaker, there is broad consensus within the medical community. Babies at 5 months in the womb are not only able to feel pain, they can hear music, they can even respond to human voices. America is one of only 7 countries in the world that still allows elective late-term abortions, joining North Korea and China. Today, we understand so much more about a baby's development during a pregnancy. Voluntarily terminating the life of an innocent baby when we know that baby can feel pain can no longer be acceptable, and a majority of Americans agree. Hearts and minds are changing. How many of us have marveled at the vivid sonogram images of a soon-to-be-born son, niece, or grandchild? How many of us have been amazed and so very grateful that babies born early as 20 weeks, have a very real chance of survival. Mr. Speaker, this bill reflects today's medical understanding about a baby's ability to feel pain. Micah's Law reflects those changing hearts and minds of Americans. Micah's Law reflects the higher aspirations of this nation, a truly moral nation, to foster a culture of life. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 36, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time is reserved. Gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Members of the House, I want to begin my remarks today by extending my condolences to the family and friends of the 59 individuals killed in the shooting in Las Vegas, and I express my best hopes for the recovery of the more than 500 persons that were injured. This Congress has a responsibility to find a way to prevent tragedies like this, as well as the daily incidents of gun violence in our communities. But instead of considering legislation to prevent gun violence, the House is spending today pushing a 20-week abortion ban that will disproportionately hurt women and families who face some of the most medically complex situations imaginable. And so it's with great pleasure that I turn to H.R. 36 because it is a dangerous and far-reaching attack on a woman's constitutional right to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy. Roe versus Wade's basic holding is that a woman has a constitutional right to have an abortion prior to the fetus's viability, which is generally considered by the experts to be around 24 weeks from fertilization. By banning pre-viability abortions, H.R. 36 is a direct challenge to Roe. Another serious flaw, in my view, of 636 is that its narrow rape exception completely misconstrues the difficult challenges that survivors of sexual assault face and the very real reasons why a rape or incest may go unreported. And so by requiring that a rape or incest survivor provide documentation to corroborate her statement that she was raped, the bill's sponsors seems to be saying that maybe women cannot be trusted to tell the truth about sexual assault, and they certainly cannot be trusted to make their own private health care decisions. And so I urge my colleagues to oppose this dangerous and mean-spirited legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I recognize now my esteemed colleague, the Judiciary Chairman, the gentleman from Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is
For
recognized.
3 minutes. 3 minutes.
For 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, since the Supreme Court's decision in Roe versus Wade, medical knowledge regarding the development of unborn babies and their capacities at various stages of growth has advanced dramatically. To give you a sense of how much technology has advanced, the issue of the New York Times announcing the Roe versus Wade decision in 1973 contained ads for the latest in technology, including a computer the size of a file cabinet that you could rent for $3,000 a month that only had a fraction, thousandth of the memory of a modern cell phone, and a basic AM radio that was as big as your hand. At the time, there was nothing like the stunningly detailed images of unborn children that are so commonly celebrated on social media today. 35 years later, in the age of ultrasound, actually close to 45 years later, in the age of ultrasound pictures, the same newspaper reported on the latest research on the pain experienced by unborn children, focusing on that of Dr. Suni Anand, an Oxford-trained neonatal pediatrician who held an appointment at Harvard Medical School. As Dr. Anand has testified regarding abortions, if the fetus is beyond 20 weeks of gestation, I would assume that there will be pain caused to the fetus, and I believe it will be severe and excruciating pain. Congress has the power and the responsibility to acknowledge these developments in our understanding of the ability of unborn children to feel pain by prohibiting abortions after 20 weeks pregnancy post-fertilization, the point at which scientific evidence shows the unborn can experience great suffering. The bill before us does just that, and in doing so, it saves lives. In fact, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office is so confident that this bill would save lives that it took the rare step of estimating the number of lives that would be saved if this bill is enacted. The CBO conservatively estimates that this bill would save over 2,000 lives each year, giving America the gift of thousands more children with all the wondrous human gifts they will bring to the world in so many amazing forms for generations to come. I would like to thank Judiciary Committee Member Trent Franks for introducing this vital legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill, both on behalf of unborn children and on behalf of the voters you represent, who overwhelmingly support this legislation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you. I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, the Honorable Mr. Cohen.
Gentleman for Tennessee is recognized for
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time to speak on this important subject. While it's important, it's also embarrassing somewhat to us, because I listen to the other side, and the first thing that the chairman does over here is he shows a New York Times ad And because of the New York Times ad at the time of Roe v. Wade, he suggests that we should turn over Roe v. Wade because it's antiquated. Well, in 1791, the Second Amendment was adopted, and we had pistols and we had guns that you could shoot one bullet at a time. And yesterday we had a man in Las Vegas with guns that could shoot and kill 59 people and wound 500. And if you get me an ad from 1791, those weapons were not in that ad. But do they talk about changing the Second Amendment? Do they talk about protecting Americans from that type of violence? No. They come here and talk about protecting the unborn, forgetting about the rights of women, guaranteed them by Roe v. Wade, the law of the land, which is the law of the land, that says viability comes at 24 weeks. And they talk about what they say are medical experts who come substantial body of medical evidence. What they don't tell you is the Congress of obstetricians and gynecologists are against this bill. And there's no medical group or medical society in this country that's for this bill. But they know more about medicine and about pain for the unborn than do the doctors and the scientists. But they bring this to us, an unconstitutional bill. An unconstitutional bill that the CBO estimates will cost us from $65 to $335 million over 10 years. Their concern about the budget goes out the window. And the truth of the matter is, this goes back to the Rules Committee debate on this bill. We were told it's popular. The polls show people want this. This is a political bill that's had no hearing in the Judiciary Committee, had no markup in the Judiciary Committee. That's called regular order, something we were promised by the Speaker, a new day in Congress. We were going to have opportunities for both sides to debate. The kind of things John McCain, a great American hero, sees as wrong in the Senate, which is just as wrong in the House. Two sides coming together to debate, to vote, to amend, to discuss. No, it comes straight to the floor because it's politically popular. More politically popular this week than having a bill to allow for silencers for weapons, which was going to be the bill du jour for this week. But it was pulled, and instead we've got this unconstitutional law that flies in the face of Roe v. Wade, takes rights away from women, and treats them without exceptions that are necessary to make a law proper concerning rape and incest.
Time's expired.
30 more seconds.
Pardon? 30 more seconds. Gentleman's recognized.
Seconds.
Thank you, sir. Bottom line is, this bill is unconstitutional, an attack on women's rights, an attack on the Constitution, and we should be looking at changes in our laws about guns and violence, at least mental health, something to respond to what happened in Las Vegas instead of another moment of silence. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I recognize my colleague and the lead sponsor of Micah's Law, the gentleman from Arizona, for 5 minutes.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, for the sake of all of those who founded this nation and dreamed of what America could someday be, and for the sake of all of those since then who have died in darkness so that all of us as Americans could walk in the light of freedom in this moment. It is so very important that those of us who are privileged to be members of this United States Congress pause from time to time and remind ourselves of why we are really all here. Thomas Jefferson, whose words mark the beginning of this nation, said, "The care of human life and its happiness, and not its destruction, is the chief and only object of good government." The phrase in the 5th Amendment capsulizes our entire Constitution. It says, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." And the 14th Amendment says, "No state shall deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, protecting the lives of all innocent Americans and their constitutional rights is why we are really all here. And yet today, Madam Speaker, a great and tragic shadow looms over America. More than 18,000 very late-term abortions are occurring in America every year, placing the mothers at exponentially greater risk and subjecting their little pain-capable unborn babies to torture and death without anesthesia or federal protection of any kind. This in the land of the free and the home of the brave. It is the greatest and most insidious human rights atrocity in the United States today. Almost every other major civilized nation on earth protects pain-capable unborn babies at this age, and every credible poll of the American people shows that they are overwhelmingly in favor of protecting them. And yet we have given these little babies less legal protection from unnecessary cruelty than the protection we have given farm animals under the Federal Humane Slaughter Act. And you know, Madam Speaker, it seems like we're never quite so eloquent as when we decry the crimes of a past generation. And how is it that sometimes we're so staggering blind when it comes to facing and rejecting the worst atrocities in our own time? But today, Madam Speaker, I'm especially thankful because the winds of change are now beginning to blow, and the tide of blindness and blood is finally turning in America. There is a new leader who lives in the White House, and he is deeply committed to protecting the least of these, our little brothers and sisters. And Madam Speaker, today we are poised to pass the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act in this chamber. And no matter how it is shouted down or what distortions or deceptive what-ifs, distractions, divisions, gotchas, twisting of words, changing the subject, or blatant falsehoods the abortion industry hurls at this bill and its supporters, this bill is a deeply sincere effort, beginning at their 6th month of pregnancy, to protect both mothers and their pain-capable unborn babies from the atrocity of late-term abortion on demand. And ultimately, it is a bill all humane Americans will support if they truly understand it for themselves. Now, Madam Speaker, this will be a vote that all of us will remember for the rest of our lives. And it will be a time now for the U.S. Senate to find the courage and the humanity to take a stand for these, the most helpless of all human victims. The Senate's action will be considered in the annals of history, and I believe in the councils of eternity itself. And Madam Speaker, passing this bill really shouldn't be so hard, because in spite of all of the political noise, protecting little pain-capable unborn children and their mothers is not a Republican issue, and it's not a Democrat issue. It is a test of our basic humanity and who we are as a human family. So it's time for the members of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate to open our eyes and our souls and remember that protecting those who cannot protect themselves is why we are really all here. And it's time for us, all of us as Americans, Madam Speaker, to open our eyes and our hearts to the humanity of these little pain-capable children of God and the inhumanity of what is being done to them. With that, Madam Speaker, I would yield.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Georgia reserves. And the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, thanks to Ms. Jayapal, a member of the Judiciary Committee, she has agreed to let Ms. DeGette of Colorado, the co-chair of the pro-choice caucus, proceed in front of her for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the chairman and also to Ms. Jayapal for allowing me to speak. Today I rise for my former district director, Chris, and his wife, Bridget. This is their story. Bridget was pregnant with their very much wanted second child, but after the 20th week, they were stunned to learn that the brain stem of the fetus was not attached. And if the baby even survived, then the newborn would likely die within hours. Doctors told the family if they wanted more children, it would be a good idea to end the pregnancy. And so, after consulting with their minister, they decided to do so. The happy ending is that a year or so later, another child was born, and she's happy and healthy today. You know, as co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus, I know that difficult circumstances always surround these highly personal decisions. And I don't think that the U.S. Congress is the body that should impose their opinion. Just imagine the horrible choices families would have to make if H.R. 36 became law. 99% of abortions are conducted before the 20-week amount. Virtually all the rest are just like this situation. I urge the body to reject this bill and to move on to important issues that are facing this country.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I recognize the Speaker of the House, the gentleman from Wisconsin, for, well, as much time as the Speaker may consume. 1 minute? Okay, 1 minute.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I thank her for her leadership. I would also say to the last speaker, this affects that 1% that she was referring to. Look, Mr. Speaker, life is precious. We're reminded of this in ways wonderful. We're reminded of this in ways difficult. Today, I rise in support of life. I rise in support of Micah's Law. I rise in recognition that advancements in technology today both reveal more about the stages of life as well as show us the promise for preserving it. As unpleasant as it may be, technology reveals something to us about suffering. It now shows us that the unborn can feel pain inside the womb. The science is in and the science is real. At 20 weeks old, ultrasound images reveal that unborn babies respond to unwanted stimuli, to pain, the same exact way adults do. They recoil, they contract. In cases of abortion, these unborn babies are feeling pain. They suffer. That is really hard to hear, and it's really hard to say. But now we are seeing scientific evidence and proof that these babies are in pain. The question is, what do we do about it? We can't claim ignorance. Their pain is no longer invisible to us. And we cannot say that as a society with a good and upright conscience that we can just continue to ignore it. The Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, sponsored by our colleague Trent Franks, protects these babies by restricting abortions to 20 weeks after fertilization occurs, the point at which science has proven a baby can feel pain. It is easy to turn a blind eye to the pain of others. For a moment, you get to think that if we just ignore it, it will go away and it doesn't exist. But our hearts and our minds are always going to remind us. We cannot stop the pain of the world by turning away from it. And we must not turn away from the pain of the most vulnerable among us, the ones who have nowhere to run to. Our humanity shines brightest when we stand up for those who are suffering, when we protect people from pain. So I simply ask my colleagues, I employ my fellow Americans, let's be moved by this suffering. Let's also be inspired by life. Thank you. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield to the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal, a member of the Judiciary Committee. 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to strongly urge a no vote on H.R. 36, and I rise today for Gina. Gina, who lives in Seattle, found out at her 20-week ultrasound that the baby had multiple fetal anomalies, both cardiac and brain, that were fatal. The baby would either die before birth or within the first few days or weeks of life. Gina decided to end the pregnancy, her constitutional right to make decisions about her own body. If Gina were in a different state with restrictive laws, she would not have been able to get the evidence-based and compassionate care that she deserved. This important, very personal decision was made between Gina and her doctor. The Supreme Court has made it clear that it is her right, and yet our Republican colleagues continue to try to take that right away from Gina and other women in her position. This bill not only takes health care decisions out of the hands of patients, but, Madam Speaker, it could penalize doctors with up to 5 years in prison for performing these abortions. This is unconscionable. Gina and all women deserve to have access to care that is comprehensive.
30 seconds.
The gentlelady may resume.
I thank the gentleman. Gina and all women deserve to have access to care that is comprehensive and compassionate. And on their behalf, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. We must stop these bans and support women like Gina to continue to have their constitutional rights and to make decisions about their own bodies. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my colleague, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Chairman of the Education and Workforce Committee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Georgia for her leadership on this issue. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. The United States currently stands alongside North Korea, China, and Vietnam as one of only 7 countries that allow elective abortion to occur after 20 weeks post-fertilization. At this point in their life, unborn babies have a well-developed brain and nervous system as well as pain receptors. This fetal development is observed by surgeons who routinely see these unborn children react to pain. In fact, doctors administer anesthesia to these children in the womb during fetal surgeries. I'm proud to support this bill, also known as Micah's Law, because we must care for these unborn children, not cruelly inflict pain and deny them their inherent dignity by treating them as objects. One day, I hope that a cultural life will take hold in the United States and that all children will be protected under the law. However, until that day comes, it remains my solemn duty to stand up for life. Regardless of the length of this journey, I'll continue to speak for those who cannot. I urge my colleagues to vote to protect the nation's most vulnerable children and ensure they're not subject to unimaginable pain, and to affirm life by voting in favor of this bill.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize a senior member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, for 1.5 minutes.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank my friend, the gentleman from Michigan. And today I rise for Phil and his wife to tell their story. Phil and his wife tried to get pregnant for several years. After fertility treatment, they were thrilled when his wife finally became pregnant with identical twins. Sadly, their twins were diagnosed with twin-twin transfusion syndrome, a deadly complication. At week 21, Phil and his wife learned the devastating and frightening news that not only would both twins die, but that without an abortion, his wife was at serious risk of suffering a ruptured uterus. Their options were limited. Their doctor could not perform an abortion because he was affiliated with a Catholic hospital, and Phil's wife was also unable to fly due to her high-risk pregnancy. Instead, they drove from their home in Missouri to Kansas to terminate the pregnancy by induced labor and delivery. Phil and his wife were devastated. After the twins' deaths, Phil participated in a baptism and grieved their loss. And Phil wants lawmakers to know that decisions about abortion need to be made with the families and with the best medical information available. As he rightly puts it, there is no one-size-fits-all situation for all pregnancies. Placing government limitations on the constitutionally protected health care options of American women and their families will only add heartache and tragedy to these most difficult and painful decisions. On behalf of Phil and his family, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Washington.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the lady from Georgia for her leadership on this legislation, and I rise to support life. This is about the values that define us as Americans. Let's see the potential in every life, and that includes the unborn. The MICA Act is life-affirming legislation that shows compassion for the baby and the mom. 10 years ago, I received tough news that our son had Down syndrome, an extra 21st chromosome. The doctors told us it would be a long road ahead. Today, I see more clearly. Too often, others try to define a baby's future before they're even born. Part of being an American is not letting others define us. I look at our son Cole and I see a healthy 10-year-old working his way through 5th grade. His life is different than we imagined in a good way. He lights up a room. People are drawn to him. He plays sports and is in Cub Scouts. He's living a full life with huge potential. I'm proud to support this legislation that reflects our values and protects the sanctity of life, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlewoman from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize a senior member of Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for 1.5 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, Mr. Speaker. More than 40 years ago, the Supreme Court held that women have the constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy prior to viability, or at any time to protect the life and death and health of the mother. This bill is flatly unconstitutional on both counts. The Supreme Court has blocked every other 20-week ban because 20 weeks is well before the point of viability. Further, the bill includes no exception for the health of the mother, only waiving the ban if a woman's life is at imminent risk and clear violation of a woman's constitutional rights. Shamefully, the bill places new and cruel restrictions even on women accessing abortion after rape or incest. And once again, the Republicans are proclaiming the falsehood that 20-week-old fetuses can feel pain, contrary to the conclusions of every reputable researcher in the field. And what about women like Danielle from New York, who found out in the 29th week of her pregnancy that her baby's brain was dangerously deformed, and that if she and the baby were to survive the pregnancy, the baby would only live a short, extremely painful life? Danielle and her husband had 2 young children and faced a heartbreaking decision. Should they put Danielle and their family through the pain and suffering of a dangerous pregnancy and birth and allow their baby to suffer and die in pain, or should she terminate the pregnancy and mourn their baby as a family? The Constitution guarantees Danielle the right to make that choice with her family and her doctors. It does not grant that right to the politicians sitting in this room. I will close with Danielle's words. What my husband and I experienced was just so horrible. Unless people have walked in my shoes, they don't understand. I did what was right for my son and my family, and it's no one else's business. On behalf of Danielle, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this horrible bill. We must stop the bans.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman and physician from Tennessee.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as a proud co-sponsor, I rise today in support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Before coming to Congress, I worked as an OBGYN physician for over 30 years, where I had the tremendous privilege to see life at all stages of development. Today's technology, like 3 and 4D ultrasound, have given us a window into that miracle that shows the unborn child as a living, feeling human being. Due to medical achievements, premature babies are surviving and thriving after being born earlier and earlier, including babies born at or before 20 weeks, the 20-week cutoff by this bill. And I can give you case after case. I've watched these children grow up in my hometown. As a physician who's delivered almost 5,000 babies, it is unconscionable to me that our government allows innocent lives capable of feeling pain and enjoying life to be terminated. It's our responsibility as legislators to stand up and protect these lives who do not have a voice. This bill is an important step toward that goal, and I vote for life.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Delbini, for 1 minute.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, I rise for Stephanie from my district. This is her story. Stephanie and her husband were building their family.
They had one beautiful daughter when she got pregnant for the second time, a planned and wanted pregnancy. But at 19 weeks, Stephanie got heartbreaking news. Her fetus had a devastating fatal birth defect. Based on her age, medical history, and test results, she was strongly advised to terminate the pregnancy. Stephanie ultimately decided not to carry the pregnancy to term. She told me through tears that her daughter needed her mother and it wasn't worth the risk. It's a profoundly difficult situation for any family, but it was their decision. H.R. 36 punishes women like Stephanie. It takes personal medical decisions out of families' hands and lets politicians decide. It also places a cruel burden on survivors of sexual assault and child abuse. It's unacceptable. On behalf of Stephanie, I urge my colleagues to vote no. We must stop the bans.
Michigan Reserves. Gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Iowa.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I'm privileged to address the House of Representatives on this issue as I seek to do on each pro-life issue that we have come before this Congress. This is a powerful piece of legislation that has had a lot of hands on it that's produced good work. And the difference in this debate that you hear here, Mr. Speaker, is anecdotes on this side looking for exceptions that might sway somehow the people on the side that understand the rule is this. Life begins at the moment of conception. Human life is sacred in all of its forms. And these little babies that are 20-week mature can and have and do survive outside the womb, and they can feel pain inside the womb. And doctors that are doing surgery on pregnant mothers give anesthetic to those children because they don't want them flinching in the womb and suffering while they do the surgery. How can we support a ghastly procedure of abortion on demand to end the life of the miracles that we need to put this country in the right condition? 65% of the babies 22 to 26 weeks old survive that are born premature. And I said, we know they feel pain. And so I applaud everyone who's done the work on this. I stand solidly with the entire pro-life movement we have in this country. We have a long ways to go to get to where we need to be, but this is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Gentlelady Reserves. Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize for 1 minute the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Mr. McEachin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, today I rise to share Denise's story. Already a mother of 2 young children, Denise was expecting her 3rd child. Until her 20-week scan, all her tests had come back perfectly. Her entire family was eagerly awaiting a baby boy. The scan revealed that her son's brain had several severe deformities. He was also showing signs of other complications. It was the most painful and devastating day of Denise's life. She spoke to numerous doctors and specialists. She spoke to her family and sought the guidance of counselors and professionals. Ultimately, she and her husband decided to end the pregnancy. But finding a provider and arranging for the procedure was very difficult. There was not a single doctor in Virginia she could go to. Denise, as a grieving mother in the middle of an absolute emotional crisis, found herself desperately calling doctors and hospitals all over the country to access the medical care she needed. Thanks to a family friend, she was ultimately able to find a provider in a major city within driving distance. H.R. 36 would have denied her that chance. On behalf of Denise and others like her, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. We must stop the bans.
Gentleman from Michigan Reserve. Gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you. I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise because our family will welcome its first grandchild in the coming months. This is her 17-week ultrasound, and I cannot wait to meet her. This child is already known by her mother, Julia, quoting Psalm 139, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." Mr. Speaker, this child is a gift from God, a gift that we have far too often abandoned in this country. Today we know so much more. We know that after 3 weeks, my granddaughter had a heartbeat. After 7 weeks, she began kicking her mother like any good Wagner child would. By week 12, she could suck her thumb. And at week 20, my granddaughter knew the sound of her mother's voice and could feel pain. Mr. Speaker, I stand for life, from conception to natural death. I stand for H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, and on behalf of my granddaughter, I will continue to fight for the day when abortion is not only illegal, but it is unthinkable. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Georgia reserved. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman from Michigan. Today I rise for Dr. Danielle. Here's her story. Dr. Danielle recently had 3 patients drive from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. to access abortion care. One patient from Winston was diagnosed with Edwards syndrome just before 20 weeks. Edwards syndrome has no treatment, and it's usually fatal before birth or within the first year of life. Given the 72-hour waiting period in North Carolina, the patient would have passed state limits for when she could access abortion. She had to drive more than 6 hours to the Washington, D.C. area for her care. North Carolina already has an awful 20-week ban. We don't need this ban nationwide. On behalf of Dr. Danielle and the women she helped, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. Stop the bans.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the Majority Leader, the gentleman from California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Madam Speaker, last week I had the pleasure of meeting a young boy named Micah Pickering. He was cute and shy. And you know, as young boys often are, he'd give me a high five, play around, and run to where everybody had to catch him. Now, he gave me this bracelet. You see, it says, "Miracles for Micah." And you know what? He is a miracle. And he is strong. He was born prematurely at only 20 weeks. He spent the first 128 days of his life in a neonatal intensive care unit. Though he could fit in the palm of your hand, his parents couldn't hold him at first. His skin was so sensitive, the slightest touch could cause little Micah intensive pain. It didn't matter where he was. If he was in that intensive care unit, or if he was still waiting for that expected date to be born, he could feel and he wanted to live. The fact is, children at 20 weeks feel pain. Science increasingly shows it. The European Journal of Anesthesiology describes how it is critical to administer anesthesia during fetal surgery procedures. You know, a standard text on human development, Patton's Foundations of Embryology, shows how the basics of nervous systems are formed by week 4. Dr. Ronald Russo of Boston's Children's Hospital wrote that by week 18, children have developed sensory receptors for pain. 2 independent studies in 2006 used brain scans and shown unborn children respond to pain. These children have noses, eyes, and ears. You can hear their heartbeats and feel them move. They are human. The Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, I like to call it Micah's Law, is called what it is because children like Micah feel pain. Those children are strong, just like Micah is strong. And those children should be protected. Now, I have to admit, Madam Speaker, across the aisle I do hear some beautiful speeches filled with compassion for the voiceless, the defenseless. and the marginalized. They are trying to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. But what about Micah? What about the thousands of others like him, the same age he was born? What about the millions who were never given a chance? Look into Micah's face. I think we all should. And tell me he isn't human. Look at him when he was born and tell me that child doesn't have a right to live. We should care for the voiceless, for those whose cries of pain are never heard. We should care for the defenseless, for those who will only be saved if we act to protect them. We should care for the marginalized, for those who have their very humanity denied, even as their noses, eyes, ears, and heartbeats, or every movement are visible testaments of their life. These children need love. Their mothers need love. Let's not end the pain. These children are suffering, so let's end the pain. These children want to live, so let's end their pain. Micah is a beautiful kid, and there are millions of Micahs who will never smile. Micahs who will never walk. Micahs who will never scrape their knees and get into trouble. Micahs who will never learn to read. Micahs who will never fall in love and have children of their own. Micahs who will never have the chance to tell their mother and father, I love you. We will never know those Micahs. Our lives are poor because their lives were cut short. But there are more. Instead of pain, we should fill them with love. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Ms. Jan Schakowsky, Illinois, 1 minute.
Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for yielding to me. I rise for Tori. This is her story. Tori and her husband planned their pregnancy carefully to make sure her maternity leave worked with her graduate studies. And they were thrilled that the plan right for their family came together and they were pregnant. At 20 weeks, during a routine ultrasound, they were devastated to learn that the fetus carried a rare disorder that resulted either in the death of the infant shortly after delivery or a very shortened lifespan wrought with profound disability. Their situation was now out of control. It is one decision that no parent ever wants to have to make. Their decision was agonizing, and the pregnancy after 20 weeks or watch their child die or suffer. On behalf of Tori, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. We must stop the bans.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, a former abortionist, Dr. Levantino, testified before Congress and described how he and other abortionists actually kill helpless babies. He killed 1,200 of them. Quote, imagine if you can that you are a pro-choice OBGYN like I was. Using a Sofer 13-inch clamp with rows of teeth, grasp anything you can inside the womb. Once you've grasped something inside, squeeze on the clamp, set the jaws, and pull hard, really hard. You feel something let go, and out pops a fully formed leg about 6 inches long. Reach in again and grasp anything you can, and out pops an arm. Reach in again and again and again with the clamp and tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart, and the lungs. Even if pain wasn't present, Madam Speaker, dismembering a child is violence against children, and it's inhumane. But these babies actually suffer excruciating pain during the abortion. Dr. Colleen Malloy from Northwestern University has said, in today's medical arena, we resuscitate patients at 20 weeks and are able to witness their exuteral growth. She says, I could never imagine subjecting my tiny patients to horrific procedures that involve limb detachment. Support H.R. 36.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, And the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I'm pleased to recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear, for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you to the gentleman. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it's hard for me to understand why our colleagues on the other side of the aisle embrace junk science. Whether it's around global warming, where 99% of the scientists says, yes, it's happening. In this case, we have the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecology from 2010 indicating that connections from the periphery to the cortex is not intact until 24 weeks. The cortex is necessary for pain perception. In 2012, ACOG, in the Journal of American Medical Association, embraced that statement. So the vast majority of physicians and scientists say there is not pain perception at 20 weeks. But let me talk about Dr. Jen and Sammy. Sammy was 17, terrified and pregnant when she went to a clinic, quote unquote, that ended up being a crisis pregnancy center. The center gave Sammy a free private ultrasound, which was actually broadcast throughout the clinic for all to see, a violation, I might say, of HIPAA. When Sammy said she wanted to end the pregnancy, the center called her almost daily, saying she would die, get sick, or go to hell. Thank you.
Gentlelady may be resumed for 30 seconds.
The center also lied about her due date, telling Sammy it was too late for an abortion. Finally, Sammy called her mom, who flew her to California to see Dr. Jen. On behalf of Dr. Jen and Sammy, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Nebraska.
Gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Maddie Brinkerhoff was an early feminist author and lecturer from the Midwest where I live, and she had this to say about abortion: "It is evidence that either by education or circumstances that she, the woman, she has been greatly wronged." In this spirit, Madam Speaker, I think there is an opportunity here to perhaps bring Congress together around a humane proposition that requires thoughtful but necessary reflection on the deepest meanings of pain. We all know pain, but pain teaches us profound lessons about suffering and sacrifice and patience and the redemptive healing possibilities of encountering one another in our vulnerability as humans in interdependent community. Pain is something from which we naturally recoil, but it also enables us to build the compassion toward those who are weak and dependent or alone. So, Madam Speaker, in letting our natural impulse to respond to another who is in pain, we can grasp what it means to be truly ourselves, to be truly human, and to care deeply about everyone, and to really internalize what is at issue here.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to H.R. 36, which is a nationwide 20-week abortion ban. And I'd like to share a story about Lindsay, a woman from California. Lindsay ended her pregnancy at 24 weeks after a devastating diagnosis. When Lindsay had her 12-week ultrasound, everything looked completely normal. But the picture was different at the 21-month anatomy scan. Lindsay and her husband learned that their baby girl had lethal skeletal dysplasia. Lindsay sought out additional opinions from 3 maternal fetal specialists. They all agree that her lungs were not developing properly and she would not survive. Lindsay and her husband chose to end the pregnancy at 24 weeks. Lindsay wants lawmakers to know, and I quote, "If I had to carry her to term, she would not have survived. As her mother, it is my right to spare her suffering, and that is what I did." The cruel ban on the floor today would only make these heart-wrenching situations worse for families like Lindsay's. On behalf of Lindsay, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. Republicans should stop playing politics with women's lives and focus on the real problems facing this government and this country, and stop interfering in the private lives of women. We must stop this ban.
Expired. Gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Tennessee.
Gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's difficult to imagine what could be more important than establishing who is protected under the law and who is not, who is given a chance of life and who is denied it. And as technology continues to evolve, the more we can celebrate the ability we have to save a baby at just 20 weeks after conception is truly remarkable. I remember when I first became a nurse some 40 years ago, I vowed to devote myself to the welfare of those committed to my care, whether they were born or unborn. I'm still committed to that today. And 40 years later, the science tells us that after 20 weeks of pregnancy, unborn babies are able to feel pain inside the womb. The Pain Capable Unborn Protection Act protects those who cannot protect themselves when handed a death sentence. Madam Speaker, there are currently 7 countries in the world that allow elective late abortions, countries such as North Korea and China. Why in the world is the United States on the list of countries characterized as human rights abusers? Our nations can do better than that. I have seen how special care is given to reduce the pain of these precious premature babies at 20 weeks in a NICU. Unborn children in the womb at this stage should be protected too. And we must pass the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act to give these unborn children a chance to see the light of day. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, how much time remains on each side?
The gentleman from Michigan has 11.5 minutes. The gentlelady from Georgia has 10.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased now to recognize the gentlelady from Massachusetts, Representative Clark, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Today I rise for Amelia. This is her story. 18 years ago, Amelia was pregnant with her 2nd child. She was happily married, financially secure, and eager to welcome a new baby into her family. After Amelia's baby was diagnosed with Down syndrome, she was even more determined to raise her baby with love and compassion. Imagine her devastation when after a 20-week ultrasound, the baby was diagnosed with fetal hydrops, and a battery of tests revealed her baby would not survive to term. Amelia made a wrenching decision to terminate her pregnancy rather than have her baby suffer. Amelia's hospital didn't provide abortion services, so she went to Boston and had to pass through a wall of picketers that told her she was a murderer. In the waiting room, she realized every other patient had the same story. No one was carrying a healthy baby. Every woman there was experiencing profound loss. Under a 20-week ban, none of these moms could make a decision for their families with their doctors. We would make that decision for them in Congress. On behalf of Amelia, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. We must stop the bans.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Representative Handel. I appreciate the time. As a former minister and as an American, even as a human being, I believe that every boy and girl is conceived with God-given potential and unique talents and abilities. Abilities they will use to serve others and make a difference. Let me put it this way. I know a young man named Luke. Luke's mother was in for a surprise when at only 24 weeks into her pregnancy, her baby boy decided it was time to meet the world. To make a long story short, Luke worked through complications with his family, and he serves in our district office in North Carolina. Every life is an opportunity. Every life is precious. A little earlier, we were challenged by the accusation that Republicans only are concerned about budget. It goes out the window when it comes to this issue. You know what? You're right. We don't put a price on life. We cherish it. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act and encourage my colleagues to support it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Frankel, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, today I rise for Donna. This is her story. She said it was a miracle. At age 41, she was finally pregnant. Early blood tests and ultrasound showed a healthy fetus. Donna was filled with the joy of an expectant mother. Then tragedy struck. Her fetus stopped growing at 26 weeks. A ultrasound showed encephaly, a fetus without a brain, a fetus that could not sustain life on its own. Madam Speaker, this 20-week abortion bill is cruel punishment for women like Donna, forcing them to face weeks of pregnant agony with no hope for the life that they so wanted. This is a bill that inflicts pain, not stops it, and I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Child Protection Act, also known as Micah's Law, named after Micah Pickering. Micah was born prematurely at 22 weeks of age, in fact, the same age and exact stage of development that the current despicable policy permits for legal on-demand abortion. After receiving intensive care in his infancy, Micah is now an active, healthy, and happy kindergartner. Micah is living proof that we need to pass H.R. 36. Congress needs to take this crucial step to ensure the protection of thousands of innocent lives every year. Innocent lives just like precious Micah. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. By at least 20 weeks of age, unborn babies can feel excruciating pain during typical abortion procedures. This is both cruel and inhumane. As members of Congress, it is our duty and our moral obligation to pass this common sense legislation. We must protect the most defenseless. Enough is enough. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this critical bill to protect the sanctity of every human life. God knows it is time. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise for Eva, an Oregon doctor who is one of the compassionate providers women turn to when facing an unintended or dangerous pregnancy. Oregon voters have rejected restrictions on abortion, but because of bans or restrictions in other states, Dr. Eva provides health care services, including abortions, to women from around the country. One patient was a high school senior who could not get an abortion in her home state. She spent weeks saving every penny so she could buy a plane ticket and pay for the procedure. Instead of making women fly across the country, instead of debating this bill, instead of cutting programs like the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program, which my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have done, we should be focused on preventing unintended pregnancies, and we should be expanding access to comprehensive reproductive care, something the Oregon legislature did when they passed the landmark Reproductive Health Equity Act. Madam Speaker, when abortion is banned, it does not go away. It drives women to unsafe back alleys and to dangerous self-induced abortion. We must stop efforts to stand between women and their health care providers. Please vote no on H.R. 36, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Multiple scientific studies indicate that by 20 weeks after fertilization, an unborn child's brain and nervous system have developed sufficiently for that child to feel pain. The United States stands among only a handful of nations that permit elective abortions after 20 weeks. It should pain us all that we fall into the same camp as North Korea and China. The Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act will moderate our extreme position and ensure we protect the most vulnerable, like Micah Pickering, a lively 5-year-old I met last week. Micah was born prematurely at the same age children would be protected under H.R. 36. Micah was able to survive and thrive after spending more than 4 months in the neonatal intensive care unit. He's now in kindergarten, and I found out when talking to him that we share a love of Legos. The bottom line is this: 20 weeks is halfway through a pregnancy. It's too late to end the life of an unborn baby. It violates what Americans want. It violates science, and it violates our country's most enduring values. I urge passage of Micah's Law, H.R. 36, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Congresswoman Moore, for 1.5 minutes.
The gentlelady from Wisconsin is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, gentlemen from Michigan, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise for a second time today in strident opposition to H.R. 36. This bill is unconstitutional. It's an overt attempt to challenge women's constitutional right to a safe and legal abortion. You know, it's really disturbing that funding for the Children's Health Insurance Program and community health centers has expired, but yet this majority is focusing on doubling down on their crusade against women's health care. Let's talk about pain a little bit here. What is especially painful about this bill is that the exception for rape victims, that there's an exception in this bill for rape victims only when they report to law enforcement officials, thus resurrecting the debunked legitimate rape argument. Many women can't report rape for a variety of reasons, probably also including the sanctimonious social stigma that their congressman or congresswoman would place upon them. So this bill underhandedly re-victimizes vulnerable rape survivors. Madam Speaker, I'm a survivor of rape. That is painful. This bill is a cruel and ruthless attempt to undermine women and attack our right to govern our bodies. And I urge all of my colleagues to vote against this unconstitutional bill. And I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady from Georgia for yielding. I rise today to urge my colleagues to support the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. We have a responsibility to defend the most vulnerable in our nation, and that's exactly what this legislation does. It protects unborn children from abortion at 5 months. It is truly disheartening that I have to beg many of my colleagues to support a bill like this when it is scientifically proven that unborn babies feel pain after 5 months. Premature infants in the NICU are protected from pain. Children in the womb should be protected from pain also. I will always fight for the right to life, and I believe we have a responsibility to defend all innocent lives. In fact, this is close to home. I have 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters. I have had to see both my wife and each one of my daughters experience difficult pregnancies and make difficult choices. I can't imagine life without my 4 children and my 12 beautiful grandchildren. Every child should be given a chance at life. New life is created by God, and we must give a voice to these precious babies who cannot speak for themselves. Our nation can and must protect the most vulnerable among us, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman Conyers. Today I rise for Katie in California and in support of women everywhere who have relied on access to safe abortion procedures in their lifetime. When Katie and her husband found out as newlyweds that Katie was pregnant, they were overjoyed. 18 weeks later, they discovered that the fetus had multiple severe health problems, including spina bifida and a tethered spinal cord. This news was heartbreaking, and Katie and her husband made the decision to end the pregnancy at 22 weeks. Katie wants lawmakers in Washington to know that it is not their right to make this decision for her or other women. She says it's a horrific situation, and until you've been through it, you have no idea, and you can't make that decision for someone else. On behalf of Katie, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 36. We must stop the bans.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Alabama.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. It's a long title for a bill. However, we're talking about protecting unborn children. As it's been obvious here today, it is always difficult to talk about this issue, but when we talk about pain-capable unborn children, we're referring to, in particular, children who are still in the womb at 20 weeks. As it's been pointed out by my colleagues time and time again, scientists have proven that unborn children, even at 20 weeks old, are capable of feeling pain. The goal of this legislation is to protect these children by ensuring that they cannot be aborted. Today, if a physician performs an in utero surgery on a 20-week-old unborn child, the standard protocol for the child is to be treated as a patient, not just a blob of tissue. That child would be given an injection of pain medication before the surgery, and this is above and beyond the anesthesia given to the mother before the surgery. These babies have demonstrated to medical experts that they respond to painful stimuli because they flinch and they recoil from sharp objects. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this legislation when it comes to the floor, do the right thing to protect unborn children. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you. I'm pleased to recognize a senior member on the Judiciary Committee, Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Gentlemen, Mr. Conyers, I think we can remember the same type of hearings and the same type of legislation many years ago. Again, denying women their constitutional rights. I can see as clear as I can see you, Madam Speaker, the women that were sitting and begging us not to undermine them, their doctor, and their faith. So I rise today to say, my friends on the other side of the aisle, you've gotten it wrong. There is no mass abortions. There is no call for mass abortions. The women that are undergoing these procedures are women who have prayed, who have looked to their faith, their doctor, and their family. So I oppose this bill because it puts the lives of women at risk, it interferes with women's constitutionally guaranteed right of privacy, and diverts their attention from the real problems facing the American women. Let us reauthorize S-chip. People are crying about that in my district. How outrageous. One of the most detestable aspects of this bill is that it would curb access to care for women in the most desperate of circumstances. It is these women who receive the 1.5% of abortions that occur after 20 weeks. What number did I say? 10, 20, 1.5. And this is not diminishing the aspect of this. But it is those women have prayed, they have sought doctors' help, and they as well have sought their families' consultation. We're making mockery of these women. These women are not standing on the street corner saying, I want to have an abortion. They have a serious situation like April Salazar. At 18 weeks, she and her husband found out that her baby had a lethal diagnosis. And if she carried the pregnancy to term and he was born alive, he would die shortly from suffocation. It's not pain of getting him out. He would die. And April hoped the news wasn't true. So she requested more tests to confirm the diagnosis, which she took 2 weeks. At 21 weeks, she had an abortion. This bill would have stopped April.
30 seconds additional.
Gentlelady may resume for 30 seconds.
This would have stopped April, her husband, her family, her God, and her doctor
from making the decision. Even the exceptions are bogus because you frighten these women. And the idea of Jerry or Jenny in my home state, where they had a 2-day waiting period listening to a mandatory script about abortion and sign off from 2 separate doctors. Once you start this, you're taking it away from women who have sought their faith leader, their doctor, and their family. This is a bad bill. We need to do some important things. And I would hope with the carnage of Las Vegas, to save lives, we would ban assault weapons, and we would not have that gentleman having 42 guns in his home and in his possession. That's what we need to fight to save lives.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Kansas.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Over the past 25 years, I've had the privilege of delivering over 5,000 babies. I'm absolutely convinced that babies can feel pain at 14 weeks, at 16 weeks. They can recognize their mom's voice, their brother's voice, and their sister's voice. Once or twice a year, I've been in that delivery room, being forced to deliver a very premature baby, a 24-week baby. And we're doing everything we can to save the life of that baby, calling in pediatricians and anesthesia people, doing everything heroically possible. How can we live in a world where we're trying to save that baby's life in one room, and just down the road there's people killing that baby, tearing it apart limb by limb, decapitating it? What type of a world do we live in these days? How can both of those situations exist in the same country? We have to ban these late-term abortions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Indiana.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentlelady. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Act. Our nation has long recognized that we are all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Chief among them is the right to life. I am unapologetically pro-life because all human life has dignity and should be protected, especially the lives of defenseless unborn children. Today, the House is taking a critical but seemingly uncontroversial step forward in protecting life by prohibiting abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy, or put another way, when unborn children can feel pain. Currently, the United States is one of only 7 countries worldwide, including North Korea, that still allows late-term abortions. This bill would end these horrific procedures. I pray that one day our nation will protect all unborn children, but this important bill is a big step forward towards that goal. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan.
I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you. Today I rise for Dr. Erica of New York, and this is her story. Dr. Erica's patient was raped by an unknown assailant. The patient's emotions surrounding the pregnancy were extremely complex. She desperately wanted to have a child but felt guilt, shame, and isolation after being raped. She ultimately decided to continue the pregnancy and believed it would help her grieve and grasp onto something positive after such a traumatic experience. But then the patient went for a scan at 20 weeks and was devastated to learn that the fetus had multiple lethal anomalies. This patient had to face yet another agonizing decision, and ultimately she decided to end the pregnancy. Thankfully, Dr. Erica was able to help this patient through the most difficult time in her life, and I want to share her words. Quote, "As a physician, it is my job to guide the patient through the risks, benefits, and alternatives of all options available to her. It is not my job to place judgment on patients that only serve to punish women who are already suffering, and it certainly is not the job of the legislature to interfere with the patient-physician relationship. So on behalf of Dr. Erica and the women she helped, I urge my colleagues to vote no. We must support every woman's right to make reproductive choices for herself. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan reserves, and the gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
This legislation does stir a great number of emotions in me. I do know what it is to protect life and to take life and to see life lost, and I know that our role should always be to protect the innocent. But I also know that our role as a society has been to subsidize the genocide of our unborn, and that reflects how desensitized we have become to the true value of a child. Each year as we kill hundreds of thousands, most innocent among us, unborn children who smile and who grab and who are self-aware and who feel pain. If we truly are what we do, then who are we if we purposely bring unthinkable pain to a baby boy or a baby girl just before their life is snuffed out of them? This legislation, it's a leap forward for our collective conscience as a nation. And it's a strong step forward in returning value to life that we see, especially the most unique life that exists out there, that special creature that was created by God.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, how much time remains on both sides?
From Michigan has 2.5 minutes. Gentlelady from Georgia has 2.5 minutes.
All right. Reserve. I reserve.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a proud co-sponsor of this legislation, I wanted to rise here towards the end of this long debate to reiterate a central idea. The reason behind this legislation is because of what we stand for as Americans. The Declaration of Independence, as we know, is our nation's birth certificate, and it states very succinctly in the second paragraph what has come to be known as the American Creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The reason, my friends, that the founders put the right to life first, listed as our most fundamental freedom, is because they understood that we are made in the image of a holy God. Our Creator, who gave us those inalienable rights, is the one that made each and every one of us. And because of that, there's a central truth that comes through. Every single person, every single life is of inestimable dignity and value, and your value is not related in any way to where you went to school, what you make for a living, how good looking you are, how talented you are, what your fortune was in life, whether or not you have a physical disability. Your value is inherent in who you are as a creation of the God who made you. That's the reason we stand for this. It's the reason the bill is so important, and we urge our colleagues to support it today. Thank you. I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I'm ready to close.
Gentleman is recognized.
Members, H.R. 36 is a dangerous and unconstitutional bill that demonstrates a fundamental distrust of women to make private decisions that are best for themselves and their families. It is therefore unsurprising that this legislation is strongly opposed by the nation's leading civil rights organizations, medical profession, and women's groups. In addition, 36 religious organizations noted in a letter to members opposing this bill that the decision to end a pregnancy must be left to an individual woman in consultation with her family, doctors, and any others she chooses to involve in keeping with her personal faith beliefs. And so for these reasons, I urge my colleagues to please oppose this dangerous legislation. And Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've heard many impassioned stories this afternoon. Much has changed since Roe v. Wade was upheld in the 1970s. We have made extraordinary medical advances. Today we know with great certainty that babies in the womb starting at the 5th month of pregnancy do indeed feel pain. It is extraordinarily heartbreaking when an unborn baby is diagnosed with a severe and life-threatening abnormality. Still, that baby deserves a right to life and right to dignity. My sister was born with no esophagus and given little hope to live, and by the grace of God and a miracle, within just weeks of her birth, a new technology, a new treatment came forward, and today she is a proud mother of my 2 nieces. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a good bill. It is a just bill. It is a moral bill to do what we are called, not just as Americans, but called as human beings, to protect the lives of the most innocent. I rise in support and urge every colleague to vote in support of this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Rules, Resolution 548, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on engrossment and the 3rd reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. 3rd reading.
A bill to amend Title 18, United States Code to protect pain-capable unborn children and for other purposes.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the bill?
I am in its current form.
The gentlewoman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Brownlee of California moves to recommit the bill H.R. 36 to the Committee on the Judiciary with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Page 6, line 21, insert after life the following, or health. Page 6, beginning on line 22, strike whose, and all that follows through conditions on page 7, ending in line 3. Page 11, line 20, insert after life the following, or health. Page 11, beginning on line 21, strike by, and all that follows through injury on line 22, and insert or.
Pursuant to rule, the gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her motion.
Madam Speaker, this is the final amendment to H.R. 36, which will not kill the bill or send it back to committee. If adopted, the bill will immediately proceed to final passage as amended. Madam Speaker, as many of my colleagues know, I am a mom. I have 2 wonderful children. I'm so very proud of them because both of them have decided to pursue careers that will save lives. My daughter, Hannah, currently lives in Africa working for an NGO to fight poverty and AIDS. My son is a doctor at Northwestern. Looking around this room, I see many other moms. We know the amazing joy that comes with parenthood. Most of us have been fortunate that our children were born without complications. Unfortunately, for some women, this is not always the case. Throughout this debate, members have been sharing the stories of women who wanted to be moms, who found themselves in unimaginable situations and who were forced to make one of the most gut-wrenching decisions of their lives, whether to terminate her pregnancy due to health risks. Like one woman from Michigan, who I will call Pam. Pam was already raising children and was excited and proud to be pregnant with another child. But Pam's pregnancy was causing her heart to fail. She consulted with multiple specialists who all told her that her own health was in jeopardy if the pregnancy continued. Pam's doctors advised her that the safest option was to terminate the pregnancy. But it was a very, very difficult decision for Pam and her family to make, as anyone in this room can surely imagine. Pam, of course, had to think about her children, her family, and her own life. Imagine what that decision must be like. Just take a moment and think about that. Now, imagine finding out that politicians in Washington, D.C. have told Pam that she was not allowed to make that decision on her own with her family. Imagine that. Politicians putting her health in jeopardy, telling a woman and her family that the government was going to criminalize a doctor providing her care, that her children might not have a mother growing up. That's what this bill would do. As currently written, H.R. 36 shows no concern for the long-term health of the mother, her future ability to bear children, or her ability to care for her family. This bill would force women to carry pregnancies to term even when their health is at risk. Even if the fetus has no chance of survival, this bill would require a woman to go to full term. Imagine what that would be like. Madam Speaker, my amendment simply adds the health of the mother to the existing exemptions in this bill. Without my amendment, H.R. 36 devalues the health and well-being of women and puts their life at risk. It tells other mothers, our daughters, our nieces, our granddaughters, that decisions about their long-term health are not their own. And this is not the first bill that has been brought to the floor that shows disregard for women and their families. This bill fits a disturbing pattern. Just this year, the House has considered legislation that tells women that they need to get their employers' permission if they want affordable birth control. The House has considered bills that would eliminate women's essential health benefits like maternity care and mammograms. The House has considered legislation to cut funding for women's health care centers. The House has also considered legislation that would allow insurance companies to charge women higher premiums and label pregnancy as a pre-existing condition. And tomorrow, we will consider a budget that decimates programs that are critical to the health and welfare of women and families so that we can give a massive tax cut to the wealthiest 1%. Just take one moment to think about those priorities. Madam Speaker, bills like this one disrespect and devalue women. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the motion to recommit, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Alabama seek recognition?
I rise to claim time in opposition.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes in opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my strong support for the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, or MICA's law. My colleagues who oppose this bill adamantly defend a mother's ability to have a late-term abortion and a doctor's ability to perform it. But, Madam Speaker, I've heard no mention of the third person in the room, the unborn baby. I'm astounded that the opposition chooses to focus solely on the two individuals who can speak for themselves with no mention of the one who cannot. That's exactly what we're here to do today. We are here to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. We are here to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Our bill seeks to do this by restricting abortions after 20 weeks or at the 6th month of pregnancy, the point at which research shows the unborn babies can feel pain. Last week, I too had the opportunity to meet the little boy this bill was named for, Micah Pickering. As many of you know, he was born at 22 weeks and spent 4 long months in intensive care. Micah survived, and this year he's in kindergarten. You see, children like Micah who are born prematurely are treated as patients. Special care is given to reduce their pain and increasing their chances for survival, just as it should be. So, Madam Speaker, my question to those who would oppose this bill is this. What's the difference between a baby born at 6 months outside the womb and a baby at 6 months inside the womb? How can one be treated like a miracle they're created to be, and the other treated like medical waste? If a baby like Micah can survive outside the womb, given the appropriate care, shouldn't we give other babies like him the same protection and chance to live? I've listened to my colleagues on the other side call this bill extreme. I say to oppose this bill is extreme. If we won't stop abortions at 6 months of pregnancy when a baby feels pain, when will we stop them? We have to draw a line somewhere. To say aborting a little baby who can actually feel the pain of the procedure being forced upon them crosses a line is a gross understatement. Madam Speaker, I am unapologetically pro-life, and I oppose abortion at any stage. I will always fight to grant greater protections for the life under the law. But as a society, I pray that we will start assigning greater value to life at all stages in this country. Madam Speaker, so often we get caught up in the policies of this issue and we forget that these are babies, for goodness sake. They feel pain and we need to protect them. That is why I urge my colleagues to oppose this motion to recommit and join me in supporting this underlying bill. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady from Alabama yields back. Objection. The previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. To Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by a 5-minute vote on passage of the bill if ordered and suspending the rules and passing Senate 782. This is a 15-minute vote. Questions on passage of the bill? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Savage.
Madam Speaker, I ask for a record vote.
The recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The House moves on to final passage of H.R. 36. This is a bill that would ban abortion after 20 weeks and make it a crime for an abortion that violates that ban. It does provide exceptions in the case of rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother. 5-minute final passage vote. Our Capitol Hill producer Craig Kaplan points out that all 4 Democrats who voted yes in 2015 for this 20-week abortion bill remain in the House. Cuellar, Langevin, Lipinski, and Peterson. This passed in 2015, as Craig Kaplan points out, also in 2013, but failed to reach the president's desk. Just want to let you know the schedule for the House the remainder of the week. It's all about the budget, the Republican budget coming up for debate Wednesday and Thursday. 4 hours of general debate on Wednesday. Overall, 3 hours for the Budget Committee, an hour for the Joint Economic Committee, and the House will also consider alternatives from the Congressional Black Caucus, from Democrats, from the Republican Study Group, and from progressives. A final vote they expect by Thursday, according to Craig Kaplan. The Senate, meanwhile, the Budget Committee in the Senate will take up the Republican proposal there tomorrow, beginning in the afternoon, about 2:30. We'll have live coverage of that Senate markup, the Senate budget markup, at 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. Should run a couple of hours. Follow that over on C-SPAN 3, also online at cspan.org, and on the free C-SPAN radio app.
On this vote, the yeas are 2.
Mr. Lynch.
Hey, make it heavier standing.
Mr. Lynch votes no.
this vote, the yeas are 237, the nays 189. The bill is passed. Objection! The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Chair is reminded that all persons in the gallery that are here are guests as of the House, and and any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceeding is a violation of the House rules. Whoop.